In the years immediately following the American Civil War, a period known as Reconstruction began. Reconstruction was the federal effort to reintegrate the Southern states and define the legal status of formerly enslaved people. The United States Congress passed laws granting Black Americans new constitutional rights, including citizenship, equal protection under the law, and the right to vote. To exercise these newly acquired rights, Black citizens actively organized. Many joined union leagues. Union leagues were secret, decentralized political organizations originally formed to support the Union, which later evolved into hubs for Black political organizing in the South. Local councils used their meetings to teach newly freed men about the voting process and share basic civic information. As Black Americans mobilized as a cohesive voting force, they elected leaders who championed broad community improvements. They secured funding to build public hospitals and open new wooden schoolhouses, giving their children access to formal education for the very first time. This rapid integration into electoral politics meant Black Americans were achieving real economic and social autonomy. For the former Confederate establishment, seeing the people they once held as property now drafting legislation and building public institutions was an intolerable challenge to the pre-war Southern social hierarchy. Local white residents, heavily composed of defeated Confederate soldiers, refused to accept this equality. They were determined to reverse the social progress happening in their towns and restore the old racial order by any means necessary. In Tennessee, a group of angry former Confederate soldiers formed a secret organization known as the Ku Klux Klan. What began as an obscure club quickly morphed into a sprawling network of vigilantism designed to enforce the submission of the newly free Black population. They operated under the cover of darkness, weaponizing anonymity to maximize terror. Disguised in terrifying costumes, Klan members mounted their horses for midnight raids, arriving at the homes of local political organizers to drag them outside and beat them. The immediate goal of these violent nighttime attacks was simple intimidation. By making the cost of civic participation deadly, they intended to frighten newly freed citizens into abandoning their constitutional rights and returning to work on white-owned plantations. The Klan functioned as a disciplined paramilitary force, using systematic physical terror to forcibly strip political control away from the Black community. This diagram illustrates a voting bloc. A voting bloc is a group of voters motivated by a specific common concern who vote together in elections. Voting together gave Black citizens majority power in Southern states where they outnumbered whites. Recognizing they couldn't win fairly, the Klan operated as a domestic terror organization with a specific aim: fracturing and neutralizing that unified voting bloc. To do this, they targeted the foundational pillars of Black civic life. They burned down schools, desecrated churches, and murdered local political organizers and teachers, deliberately cutting off civic education and community mobilization at its source. By systematically eliminating local leaders and destroying the buildings where they gathered, the Klan discovered the most brutally efficient method to silence an entire community's political voice without ever changing a single law. Their campaign of intimidation worked. Across the South, thousands of legally enfranchised Black citizens stayed home from the polls on election days, paralyzed by the entirely justified fear that casting a ballot would result in a midnight visit from the Klan. Victims had nowhere to turn because the local justice system was deeply compromised. The Ku Klux Klan operated with near impunity because local sheriffs, judges, and town elites were either active members of the organization themselves or too terrified of violent retaliation to intervene. This created an impossible reality for Black Americans. They held constitutional rights to vote and hold office on paper, but in practice, they lived completely unprotected by the local governments established to serve them. When the police and the courts actively participate in the violence they are supposed to prevent, the local social contract dissolves. The entire system breaks down entirely unless a stronger, higher authority steps in from the outside. Lawmakers in Washington, D.C. watched the Reconstruction state governments collapse under the weight of this vigilante violence. Frustrated by the total failure of local authorities, the national government realized it had to intervene directly in state affairs. Congress passed a series of laws known as the Enforcement Acts in 1870 and 1871. These laws bypassed corrupt local officials by making it a federal crime to interfere with any citizen's right to vote, placing the oversight of elections directly into the hands of the national government. The third and most aggressive of these measures, passed in April 1871, was commonly known as the Ku Klux Klan Act. It was signed into law by President Ulysses S. Grant, whose administration was finally compelled by the magnitude of Southern violence to take definitive action. This legislation granted President Grant extraordinary authority. He was empowered to hold individuals criminally accountable, suspend habeas corpus, a legal right protecting citizens from unlawful imprisonment, and deploy the United States military to physically suppress acts of terror. For the federal government to bypass state authority and step directly into local jurisdictions to enforce civil rights was a massive assertion of power. It marked the first time the United States mobilized its military to crush homegrown domestic terrorism. Armed with these sweeping new powers, Grant declared martial law in several South Carolina counties. He dispatched federal troops out of their garrisons and down rural Southern roads to actively hunt down, arrest, and prosecute those responsible for the violence. The military intervention yielded immediate results. Federal marshals arrested hundreds of suspected Klansmen, dragging them into federal courts where dozens were convicted, exposing and shattering their highly guarded secret networks. This uncompromising show of force broke the back of the Klan's first incarnation. By throwing the full weight of the U.S. military against them, the federal government successfully, albeit temporarily, dismantled the South's premier terror organization. The survival of a multiracial democracy depends on more than a constitutional text. It requires brave citizens to participate, rigorous legal frameworks to protect them, and the unwavering willingness of a government to wield its power against those who use fear to rig the game.